One was called Greenland. For the most part, decent film. But Cop Shop was the one that I really liked. He's not playing the same kind of character. Yeah, he's playing a hitman, but he's not playing the same kind of alpha male character. Frank Grillo, he's kind of almost a wuss in aspects of this film.
Yes.
He's got a man bun. This isn't typical Gerard Butler and Frank Grillo, and they are having fun. These guys are just having a blast. And you mentioned that, and also Alexis Louder. You said she was basically. I view her as the main character, and she does disappear too much. The third act is not the best. I think we agree on all that. But for something that is just gonna blow your expectations away in the proper way, Cop Shop, what a revelation!
Yeah, I mean, I had no intention of seeing this movie, and then I end up coming to a theater near Brantford, and a critic I respected gave it a good review. So I was like, I'll do it a gamble, but I totally was expecting to go in, and that was going to be a worst of movie. But hey, I paid my ticket for a worst of movie, and I was like, no, I'm having a blast. It was probably like September wasn't great for movies. It was probably like one of my favorite movies that I saw in the theater in September.
It is a surprising film, and it's enjoyable, and the characters are fun. Toby Huss plays just this awesome villain hitman. So much enjoyment here. I was not expecting anything like this when I sat down to watch it.
And I checked its box office gross. I now feel justified putting it on the underrated list. It only made 6.7 million.
Yeah, which is not not good at all, especially considering your two leads, and they're probably going to need to get paid a pretty chunk. But this, I don't know if I had said it, but this movie is on my list as well.
Okay.
Because it was just a delightful surprise, and it was a film that I feel like people just chose not to watch, and I wish they did. I think this is, a great definition of what we mean when we sit down and talk about the most underrated films of the year.
And here's the thing, with something like Cop Shop, with something like The Last Duel, they went to the theater. You could have went. And now if you're not going to the theater because of COVID reasons, I totally understand. That's a justified reason. But if you go to the theater anyways, you always pick the big blockbusters, and then you complain that there's not those original movies anymore. Last Duel, Cop Shop, they weren't supported. That's why we don't get enough of these kind of movies.
Yep, that's exactly it, and it's always a shame because there are rays of sunshine through the crowd of IPs that are mostly in the theaters, and I wish I saw. I honestly, this and Last Duel, I both really wish I saw in the theater, because I think they both would have been fun for what they were, seeing on the big screen with the big sound.
But unfortunately, they were rude, and they came out at times that it wasn't good for you to go to the theater.
Mm-hmm. Poo poo, I say, poo poo.
Okay, all right, all right. You said poo poo, so I got to do a quick rabbit trail here. Okay, so my kids are goofy and they're creative, and when we walk home, sometimes I pretend to be certain characters that then they get to play off that character and have a lot of fun. And one of my characters is Mr. Serious, and he is way too serious. And anytime my kids do anything goofy, he'll be like, "That is too silly, poo poo." And my kids absolutely love it because they love the fact that this guy who's too serious still says poo
Poo
poo.
poo.
So I'm only referencing this because you said that.
Okay, well, that was a good rabbit trail, a fun one.
Yes, Mr. Serious, poo poo. He would poo poo this podcast.
He's too serious.
He is. My next one, I'm really looking forward to champion this one because it's a Canadian picture, or at least it is. I believe it was a joint Canadian-New Zealand picture. It came to theaters, probably because it's a Canadian movie, and so I think sometimes Cineplex tries to support certain Canadian movies, so I got to see it in my local Cineplex, and this is Night Raiders, which is sort of a post-apocalyptic kind of futuristic movie. We haven't got enough post-apocalyptic movies.
No, they don't happen very often.
But this one is directed by Denis Goulet. It was also written by Denis Goulet. And one of the things that I like about this picture is that it is sort of an allegory for residential schools. It's basically about sort of our treatment to Aboriginal people. It's probably why it's a Canadian and New Zealand co-production, because both those countries have a very dark history of how we treated Indigenous people. And so I think even Taika Waititi might even be a producer on this, but I could be making that part up. But anyways, because I know that's something he's passionate about as well. But basically, this picture, like I said, it's kind of set in the future. It's about her. It's about these drones, these futuristic drones that go around and try to find any child, because children are not supposed to be with their parents. They're supposed to be going to the school where they get reprogrammed and they learn to follow the state. They become warriors for the state. And so we're in this era where certain people are trying to hide their children away so that they don't have to join this evil school. And so we start with the picture sort of about the mother and trying to, with her daughter, they're on the run and they're trying to avoid. And just a quick spoiler, because a big part of the plot is that she does get captured. And so it's about the mother then fighting this rebel group, trying to save her daughter, and her daughter trying to basically avoid being programmed and continue to be who she is and continue to have her language. And the mother at one point finds this rebellion, but it consists of Cree people. And so in this film, you get some of the Cree music, you get a bit of the Cree culture and their history, and so that stuff is really beautiful. It's really well made. The drones, the special effects are good for what it is. This is a movie that's probably aware of its budget, so it doesn't overdo the drones, it doesn't overdo the special effects, but there is some decent action sequences here. I think the leads are really fantastic. Brooklyn Letexer Hart plays the daughter, and Ellie Maja Tailfeathers plays the mother, who is on the run to try to save her daughter. And I think the performances here are really solid. I think there's some interesting background characters. I would say it's a little didactic. I would say it's a little on the nose. And that kind of is what stops it from being a classic. There is parts of this movie that does get bogged down with the messaging. You definitely know it's trying to say something here. And so I get that. And I get that that will definitely alienate certain people. But I feel like it's a message that hasn't been talked about a lot. And I like it framed in the science fiction realm. And I think the performances are good. I think there's some really great scenes here. So despite that, I think it's definitely worth seeing. And I mean, I will admit part of it is because it's a Canadian movie. And it's speaking to real Canadian issues right now, but doing it through sort of a science fiction bent. And so I appreciate that. And I definitely think it should be on this list, because I would argue that probably most of our listeners has never heard of Night Raiders. I saw it in theaters.
It's sort of seeming to me drawing parallels from last year's film Blood Quantum, which was a post-apocalyptic zombie film about Indigenous people of Canada, and it was an allegory for colonialization and all that. And
like this.
Yeah. So it sounds like they're very, very similar. And I love it when movies take those different angles to say something, go down the science fiction route or go down the horror route or whatever. And I think you said you said it started feeling a bit didactic. That kind of reminds me of Blood Quantum. I think the third act of that film was not the best handled. Everything up to that point was incredibly good. But yeah, it's really interesting that you had seen this. I hadn't heard anything about it. I didn't know about this film. Huge blind spot, it sounds like. But it's a movie I really want to see now.
Well, because it's a Canadian production, I don't even know if it's been released in the States yet. Like, I'm not sure. Like I said, it made it to a theater in Brantford here, so it probably had a bit more promotion with it being a Canadian movie. but I'm not sure if it was straight to video in the States or if it got released in the States. Because, yeah, I've heard almost nothing about it, but I wonder if that's because most of the sources I check are American, and maybe they don't know about this movie.
It's quite possible. I could see that being the case, very much so. It's when something, even if it's just like, you know, 4 feet over the border from the U.S. into Canada, things can really get lost. I think, especially when it comes down to anything of foreign distribution rights or whatever. You never quite know if a movie's going to be able to get a push at the same time in different markets. Hopefully, if it hasn't gone out in the States yet, it does and gets some attention.
Yeah, this is like the Caramel or Mr. Big or Crunchy of movies, because those aren't available in the States either.
Yeah, and Red Rose. Red Rose tea is only available in Canada, if you recall from the commercials years ago.
The majority, a good portion of our listeners are Americans, so right at this part, they're just like, huh?
Yeah, okay. So, all right, we're going to bring it back. One film about a Canadian Indigenous story that I really want to see this year is called Beans. Apparently, it is quite good. It is, I think, about the Oka standoff in 1990 in Quebec. That sounds like a really, really interesting film, and I love seeing that there are some diverse films out there.
As a fun note, I've been writing down your movies that just so that I have a list so I can put them up on the site as your picks. And I think it's very appropriate. I forgot to put down The Forgotten Battle.
The one movie I'm saying, people, this is the one you have to see. Yeah, The Forgotten Battle. It is too forgotten. Now, my last film here is one that I'd seen a few weeks ago. It's called I Blame Society. It is a movie that has some documentary type elements because our main character, Jillian, she is wanting to become a filmmaker, and she is looking for something interesting to do. Now, friends of hers, a couple that hang out with her and her boyfriend, jokingly mentioned they think she would have made a good killer. So she decides that this is the documentary she's going to make. What does it take to be a killer? And we kind of think that it's playful because it feels playful, feels like a joke, until she starts breaking into someone's house. She chooses someone specifically at random because that's the best way not to get caught. Basically sees her at a coffee shop, follows her home, then breaks into her house. And then we also have footage of her, our main character, basically sitting on the end of this woman's bed while she's sleeping, drinking a glass of wine. It becomes very, very clear that our lead isn't just doing a quirky take on something. She's doing a legitimate documentary on how she could be a good killer. Very much, she is like the female version of Louis Bloom in Nightcrawler, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. With him, everything was analytics. It was about success, and there was no emotion. You got to do this to achieve this. You got to do this to achieve this. And she's very much the exact same thing. To make a good documentary, you got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do this. And she has no emotional attachment to anything that's going on. It is a very, very unique film, incredibly unique, very interesting film, disturbing at times. It's not going to make my best of list. It's a 3-star film, so it does have its flaws. But as far as movies that felt unique this year, this is probably the most unique movie I've seen in 2021.
All right, I've got a few questions based off your description. My first one is it found footage?
No.
Okay.
No, it's primarily shot normally. It's just there are moments where we see things from the perspective of her camera.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my other big one, because I'm sort of confused, but not confused, but I'm intrigued. Is this a dark comedy or is it actually more thriller horror?
It's thriller horror, but it's got this dark comedy in there. I mean, it really is equal parts comedy, horror, thriller. But if you're listening, heavy on the dark element of comedy, this is not a movie that you want to sit down and watch with your children.
So this is definitely more for a horror fan.
Yes. Yes. I think